reading immediately prior to this, I was reminded that on all of our recent synagogue trips to Israel, we have had some interfaith families and at their request and also for historic interest. As we have been in the north of Israel, we have diverted our planned itinerary, and now it is part of our intention to arrive at Kfar Nachum, village of comfort is how it translates, Capernaum, just the site that you were reading about, that you were hearing about just a moment ago. My wish, my hope for all of you is that you have a chance to stand on those shores as well, to experience and connect not only with the past, but also with the modern state of Israel. Friends, thank you for the already warm welcome extended to me in this community, facilitated by my amazing assistant and your very active member, Catherine Norenberg. Where is she? There. Thank you for this beautiful setting, this amazing music. I'm grateful as well for the open hand, the sincere and genuine presence of Father Tom Slauson and his family, whose sermon at our synagogue this past Martin Luther King Jr. weekend was so well received by my own congregation. Thank you as well for this sacred opportunity in a theme to which I will return shortly. It is only relatively recently in all the long and twisted history of the interactions of Jews and Christians that a rabbi and a minister would be able to share thoughts and preach to one another's congregations. Preach at, perhaps, sadly, tragically, that has happened, but not to. We chose for this day, and I love this, I don't have that freedom to just change the reading. So, thank you for that as well. We chose for this day a passage from the Hebrew Bible, from Jewish tradition, which may, because of how it has played out in our history and in the interpretive hands of subsequent generations, it may be far more familiar to Christians than to Jews. These are the words from Jeremiah, uttered in the midst of King Josiah's program of religious and political reform, meant, in fact, I am quite sure, not as a prediction for a distant future yet to unfold, but as a commentary for his own place, his own time. In this case especially, he spoke, I am convinced that he was speaking to his contemporaries and not with half an eye to events centuries hence. Renewal was happening all around him, and he meant these words for those who heard them at his own time. Hine yamim ba'im ne'um Adonai v'charati et Beit Yisrael ve'et Beit Yehuda brit hadasha. Behold, days are coming, declares the Eternal, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel, with the house of Judah. I have emphasized the degree to which these words emerge out of Jeremiah's contemporary political and spiritual world for a reason. It is because these words, and indeed these phrases, have played an important role in Christian self-understanding and, dare I say, its misunderstanding of Jewish tradition. Indeed, the term Brit Hadashah, a new covenant, is the Hebrew term for the New Testament. And these words have been heard not as the Renaissance they were meant to be, not as renewal, but as replacement. This text has gone from the splitting of hairs and the spilling of ink to the shedding of tears and the spilling of blood. I open today with this sad story, this text of terror, because indeed this is the single saddest day on the Jewish calendar. It is Tisha B'Av, the 9th of the Hebrew month of Av, a day on which in our tradition the first temple was burnt by the Babylonians, the same day on which we are told, although we fudged the calendar a little to make it that way, the same day on which we are told the second temple was razed by the Romans, a day so sad that once has become known to our enemies, more misery and suffering was heaped upon us intentionally on this day to add to the woe. This is the same day in history consciously chosen that brought about an end to over 1,000 years of Jewish life on the Iberian Peninsula. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and on that day, that very day, Spain kicked out the Jew. A sad day, I say. Indeed. And yet, as we heard, Hine Yamim Ba'im, behold, days are coming. Perhaps, in fact, they have already begun. What was need not be, what always will be. The great hope we all share as human beings is that the past need not control the future. A Jewish tradition about Tisha B'Av, the Messiah, we are told, and for us it is a figure or an era yet to come. The Messiah is going to have red hair, will be born a descendant of King David, indeed in Josiah's line, and the Messiah, legend and folklore assert, will be born on Tisha B'Av. Okay, so for us that's late July or early August, not December, but the legend speaks loudly, and even at the peak of sadness we hold out a hint of hope. And which one of us, looking around, looking back even at the past half-century, cannot but hold somewhere in our hearts that hint of hope? A memory. I served for a time as a rabbi in the remote feeling, to me anyway, growing up in this area, the remote feeling city of Erie, Pennsylvania. It was a community and a congregation that had welcomed us with open arms. But before we moved to Erie, there was only one person my family knew in the entire community, a passionate, activist, intellectual nun named Joan Chittister. As I got to know this powerful woman personally, I invited her to speak at a Friday night service at our synagogue. As she stood on our bima, our altar, and began to speak, I was moved by her opening words. She had grown up in Erie, and as a young girl had walked past the synagogue, stood on the tips of her toes trying to look in past the stained glass windows to see inside, looking in from outside because, according to the rules of her faith at the time, the choice of her church, she was not allowed. She was actually forbidden from coming inside. She told me privately afterwards that according to the rules of her church at the time, she would not even have been allowed here. My friends, we have made more progress in Christian-Jewish relations in both directions in the past half-century than in the 2,000 tortured and tumultuous years before them. Our doors are open, our minds and hearts are open, our homes are open. We are talking to each other, indeed often marrying each other, in ways simply unthinkable in an earlier era. Why is this true, and how has it happened? Is it perhaps simply an American tension for the superficial, Jews and Christians getting along better with each other because both and each care less for and feel less connected to the separate communities from which they emerged? Is it simply a secular tonic that has made our breaking bread together so much easier than it was? Sad and scary alike, to think that our common humanity might emerge more clearly the less we are invested in our religious tradition. But I do not believe this to be the case. I believe instead that it is a more nuanced view, a deeper take, and yes, a more liberal and less literal view of our faith that is opening us up to one another. Two stories, both teaching new views about the Bible itself, both ways in which we can take our heritage to heart without tearing each other apart. The first is this. A number of years ago, there was quite a stir, a deep sense of discomfort, when a secular, socialist, left-wing, anti-religious Israeli kibbutz, you got that? You're listening to me, so. You know, when I tell a joke and no one laughs, either it was a bad joke or I... So a embraced the traditional blessing over bread, which praises God as Hamotzi Lechem min haaretz, the one who brings forth bread from the earth, with words praising the farmer who brings forth bread from the earth. Now, no one would deny the role of human hands and sweat and minds in making food. Indeed, we should be all the more in touch with where our food comes from, with how it is produced, with what goes into it, both in terms of labor and content than we have been before. And it is true, of course, as the old joke says, that a nosy neighbor goes by the flower and garden of a hard-working woman and tells her, you know, you should thank God every day for the beautiful garden, the good garden that God has given you. And she said, you know, I do every day, by the way, but by the way also, you should have seen what this garden looked like when just God had it. There's a danger, indeed, of understating our own role in shaping the world. And yet, with all that, still, even amongst atheist Israelis, there was some sense of discomfort with this move. Because occasionally, even the least traditional individuals, even those who are fully aware of the human role in planting and reaping, in sifting and in baking, had some sense that there was something, the power of the sun, the cycle of the seasons, the balance of air and water and soil, something here beyond the self and beyond the human hand that borders indeed on a miracle. And that an expression of appreciation for that, even using traditional words, is not the end of the world. One of my teachers then made an analogy between the phrases bread from the earth and the linguistically similarly constructed phrase Torah from the heavens, used in our tradition to assert the sacred sense of Scripture, the divine authorship of the first 5 books of the Bible. And, by the way, how do you remember the order of the first 5 books? I can't tell this for very many years now, because they've gone out of the business, but G.E. lights never die. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Right? And this teacher said, perhaps now, even though we think we know the human role in writing and in sorting, in editing and redacting what came to be known as the Bible, still then there is a sense that there is something here beyond, a presence sought and felt, a touch of the divine emerging in our lives, even in the midst of history and power and politics. Thus can the Bible be for us holy, even if it is not holy from the hand of God. Thus can we take our tradition seriously, even if we do not take it literally. And finally, the second story, my favorite story. A rabbi of a synagogue fortunate enough to have a preschool. Every year, towards the beginning of the year, he takes the kids into the sanctuary for a tour of what's in there. And he saves the contents of the ark where the scrolls of the Torah are held for last. But one year, as rabbis sometimes do, well, he talks for a really long time. Just rabbis, not priests and ministers. And there, in the back of the room, don't you do this now, this is a point I'm making, not meant for me, are the teachers pointing at their watches, saying that their parents are coming, that the rabbi needs to finish. So he decides to end quickly, and he says to the kids, okay, boys and girls, next week we'll get together again, and I'll show you what's behind the curtains. In that synagogue, like our downstairs chapel, but not like our sanctuary upstairs, when you opened the ark, there was a curtain that you had to pull also. Well, what he didn't know, of course, is that this abrupt ending would spark a big debate amongst the little people. What's behind the curtain? One kid, obviously an aficionado of far too much American consumer culture, his parents let him watch too much TV, said, and by the way, when I'm about to say this, remember, unfortunately, this is actually a true story. It might not have happened in this order, but this is a true story. So one kid goes, when the rabbi opens the curtain next week, behind the curtain will be a brand new car. Another child, a preschool skeptic, a budding nihilist, a future follower of Nietzsche or Dostoevsky, said, when the rabbi opens the curtain, there will be nothing. A third kid had been to Hot Shabbat, which is what we call the Shabbat service, the Sabbath service for really little ones. She correctly responds that behind the curtains are the scrolls of the Torah. But a fourth child gave what I think was a deep, profound, and very important answer. Speaking to how the Bible speaks to us, how it can live in us and through us. For the fourth child said in an image I will never forget, that when the rabbi opens the ark next week, behind the curtain will be a giant mirror. And it is here, I believe, that the Bible speaks to us in the fullest force of truth and power. For when we look into its words, we see not them and then, but us and now. When we hear its song, look into its pages, we can indeed discover ourselves. And this unites us despite all our differences, or even not despite, but with, including, embracing, lifting up all our differences. We are told, Vayivra Elohim et Adam b'tzalmo, b'tzelem Elohim bara otam. Zachar u'nekeva bara otam. That was clear, right? We are made in the image of the highest we can imagine. In the image of God we are made. In God's image, all of us, male and female, tall and short, gay and straight, thin and less thin, rich and poor, white and yellow and red and brown. All of us in the image of God. We look backwards and inwards and we can discover ourselves. We look at one another and there we can discover God. Hine yamim ba'im. Behold, days are coming, declares the Eternal. For us, for now, it is in our hands and our heart. It is a new day, a new way, to be deep but also open, to turn this day from sadness to joy, to turn our history from challenge to change, not to tear down but to lift up. It is Tisha B'Av, the Messiah Jewish tradition teaches, is to be born today. Let us do our part. Let us pave the way.
And if you're able, if we proclaim our faith together.